Of course.
Yes, of course you can.
Thank you.
Was this where we're meeting?
Yes, that's what they said.
They're just taking a break from the previous session.
Got it. Okay. I didn't realize there was a different. There was the same meeting. So I dropped off the other one and I went and opened this one. I'm like, oh, it's all the same numbers and people. And I was like, why is no one talking?
No, it's not. You got on and thought, oh, it's all the same morons.
Well, yeah, but you know.
Okay, we ready to go? Dwayne?
Ready, Freddie.
You want to kick us off?
What is this one about?
Okay, you sound like everybody else. I'll tell you, the other thing is I've been getting seriously schooled by having the nerve to schedule a meeting, a whiteboarding meeting on a Friday afternoon. So with just about everybody remote. So this is going to be a little bit of a challenge anyway. But
this is supposed to be whiteboarding? Okay.
Well, and I asked this morning, like, what whiteboarding capabilities do you have? And I was told, none for remote.
Gotcha.
So anyway, this is the one, Dwayne, on the guiding principles for the integration platform.
Okay. Two things. Is the Zoom up? Are we using the Zoom?
We are using the Zoom, so you can stay in the same one.
Okay, unless you're like me and got out of it.
Right.
And I can bring up, you let me know what you're thinking about.
Well, what I'm thinking about is, you know, in one of our previous decks, we have what we came up with as the guiding principles from the POS perspective. And I think if we pull that up and just kind of use that as our guiding principles for how we think about guiding principles.
All right, I'll pull it up.
Because we have people on this call who were not part of that conversation, so it would be good just to say, hey, even if just to take it through the slides, here are the principles. Here's how we use that to knock out POS vendors. Let's now say, you know, if we're thinking in this space, other principles out there for, you know, and I guess even before we go into this too. So this was a really good exercise.
Sorry, you guys.
It's coming around. Go ahead, Charlie. What were you saying?
I was saying that when it comes to POS, it's clear that there's a space for lots of vendors. So the guiding principles was great to winnow down, you know, a field of contenders to, you know, a marketplace down to a field of contenders. I guess my question is, are we looking at guiding principles here for a similar sort of exercise, which is to say, you know, eliminate multiple vendors from a consideration, or are these principles more around architectural, you know, design, really more to help us just define, you know, if we're going to build something, things to keep in mind for architecturally, and maybe same thing, so it doesn't matter. But I don't have a sense that for UCP there are a lot of things out there for us to shop around. Is really more of an architectural and sort of enterprise approach, and maybe there are some middleware packages. You could look at like a Tibco or something, or a whatever, MuleSoft, but I don't think that really fits the bill for what we're looking for here necessarily. So trying to think of, if we're going to set some guiding principles, what's it for? Is it to winnow down a marketplace, or is it for guiding principles for development, or is the answer yes to both, or it doesn't matter?
Well, so
yes to both, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, no, it's not like we're going to go out and find 30 vendors. So, Charlie, I think you're spot on from that perspective. And so it's not like we're going to go find the 30 and then funnel them through this and see what spits out at the other end. But we are going to end up with a handful or 3, 2, 3, something, I don't know, that we are going to evaluate. And we also, may look at, okay, none of those are going to work, and we're going to build from the ground up and scratch. And so for both of those, it kind of gets back to our Tuesday conversation. In my mind, it is, what are the frameworks or guide rails that we think are the must-haves for this thing to be successful? And there is a chance that we will get into this conversation and realize it's too early. We don't know. We just don't know enough about it yet to map this out. That is a possible outcome. And if that's what it is, then that's what it is. But
I think we could probably get to the point more realistically is there will probably be a couple must-haves that we might be able to come in with, but we may not get the exhaustive list. We may ultimately decide on 1 or 2, and there may be some things that are still TBD or, as we learn more.
Well, I think if you look at, when we looked at the guiding principles, that we had these things we were looking for.
Mike, we're losing you. We're only getting every other word.
Really? Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
Better if you
Sorry, for some reason my speakerphone is on the fritz apparently. I was just gonna say, when you look at like POS, we started with these guiding principles, right? Where we said, we're looking for something that's cloud native and that has is OS agnostic and things like that. And along with that, we created a set of requirements of things that we were looking for the solution to do. I think there is not going to be any, out of the box solution that magically solves everything that we're looking for it to do, whether or not it's a framework and whether or not that framework has some, pre-built capabilities in it that we're able to leverage. I think it would be silly of us to think that we're going to get something that's just, put it in and plug it, turn it on, and it's going to do everything we need it to do. But so there's going to be, I think there would be some sort of building involved no matter what. To Dwayne's point, we might not have enough, key pieces of detail to really formulate this completely. But to the extent that we're able to identify things like in our discussion on Tuesday, should this solution own, have any data within it? That to me is kind of, a good guiding principle that we aligned on, no, with the exception of, the points that you made, Charlie. The data, metadata relative to it and how it behaves.
Mm-hmm.
So the principle might be, we expect this solution to be a facilitation layer, not data storage.
I like it. It's a start.
Another one I can think of is and I was thinking about this from the perspective of evaluating the different platforms, honestly. And some of the platforms we look at, the vendor owns the data, and I know one of the guiding principles around POS is Dyn owns the data. So I don't know if that is relevant here, but that was one I wanted to throw out.
I think that's my inclination is to say that we would own the data. I don't know in what case we would want to abdicate that, but I think it's a good call out. Does anybody disagree with data ownership?
I'm taking notes on my whiteboard. I want you to know.
So we are whiteboarding.
Yeah, we are whiteboarding.
Which is way better than waterboarding. And Mike, I think that Yeah, I think that's yes. So the answer to that is yes. Whether that becomes moot because later there's no way that it couldn't happen anyway, it's fine. It's clear. We own the data.
Agreed.
I have one more, or maybe two more, if you want to hear them.
Please.
Hey, guys.
Oh, hi. You want the ability to easily extend the microservices efficiently, cost-effectively, and easily. I guess that's a requirement more than anything else, but
I think that's okay. I think we capture it.
Mm-hmm.
Now we start microservices.
speak into the phone.
Is someone speaking in the room with you, Sharon?
Yes.
Talking about you.
Yes.
We didn't want you to hear.
Was that
I was
Marvin?
just alluding. Hi, this is Steve. I was just alluding to the fact that Sharon's previous statement mentioned microservices, which, in my opinion, is the right way to go. But do we want to put it there that this is going to be microservice based? It's going to be microservice architecture.
Well, the UCP is supposed to be isn't it a coordinated distributed set of microservices that combine to accomplish and facilitate the transfer of data?
Among other things, I'm guessing. Yes.
I think we're also looking to this platform to provide support both for events and for services, like accessing data when needed, request response stuff, as well as something happens, so therefore events happen, and therefore it's sort of the other that may trigger things too. So it's event driven. It should be event based, event driven, and support events and services.
Agreed. Some sort of like push fit functionality for that, or webhook like functionality for subscribing to events. Agreed.
And would we have some?
So queuing and notifications and all that.
I'm sorry, Mike. I couldn't hear what you're saying.
The ability to, to queue up events, prioritize them, route them.
All right. Yeah, it should have a dimension of messaging and queuing in it. So that you can have you can also have a confidence that messages will go through. Some sort of reliability. I think we have to think in terms of we have to be able to monitor it and manage it. I don't know the best way to describe it. I'll let someone who's smarter, or define it pithy way. But we need to be able to manage the system performance or visibility into system performance across the platform. So it should be transparent in that regard. And,
more than just that, it should also be able to, I think just the performance, it should be able to manage performance, right? And it should be able to proactively manage it as well as reactively manage it.
Right. But if we have systems and applications built on top of this thing too, we need to then be able to know or dive into it to say, hey, the average response time for this call is ballooned up from 30 milliseconds to 2022 milliseconds, and it's crashing things left and right. So that's got to be visible somehow, somewhere, and in a broader sort of tech stack too. Let's talk in terms of so if you look at the POS solutions and we talk about hardware agnostic. What about the technologies then that are used to manage and and develop and extend this platform, or do we want to provide some guidelines now around the tech that's used to, to build, define, what's this written in, basically, or what are we going to do this work in there? Do we have any opinions on that? Should it be agnostic in that regard too? But,
I think it should, to the extent as possible. I mean, support, be able to support a number of languages and methodologies, right?
Right.
Correct. I think it's critical because we use the word hardware here, but we really need to use the word software. Doesn't really matter. Multiple language support is critical.
We may even want to look into serverless. I think serverless
Right.
may be a key term we're looking for here.
Right. Lambda.
Okay, Michael.
I think cloud native is a better way than serverless, because you may have. I think cloud native is I think the way we'd want to describe that, Chris. Unless you're, because serverless is a very specific thing. I'm thinking, or I think, and I don't know if necessarily it or maybe it isn't specific, but is there? I'd like to learn more about your thinking around that.
If we're talking about the context specifically of a distributed suite of microservices, cloud native could imply something different than serverless. Serverless means we don't literally take a slice of the cloud and define a box. You pay on a per execution basis.
Right. So that should be another thing then too. So if it is serverless, and maybe there is and that may be a good thing to point to, because one of the things that we want to do is we need to be able to measure and manage all of the calls themselves, because at some point our funding models or the way we monetize activities that happen over this will be based on transactions, and there's some things maybe we'll own, but there may be some transactions we may end up having to go and recoup, or costs that may be driven by business activity. So therefore we have to find a way to itemize and then maybe bill that out.
Well, and I think that's a good call out, Charlie, and I would maybe even just make it more broadly speaking around whatever it is, it should ensure our ability to be a transaction based, or if some third party wants to plug into our environment to do business with a franchisee, we should be able to facilitate monetizing the integration, be it transaction based or subscription based or whatever it is.
Exactly.
Good.
So I know we're whiteboarding and lots of ideas here, and I kind of take the analogy of going to a car show. You see a concept car, it looks great and cool, but when you get to production, there's a supportability around this, and that's not on the screen, but I do want to think about all the bells and whistles we're talking about, all the capabilities. It's great. It kind of spawned a question when Charlie asked about how do we code this, how do we actually support it from that perspective, and in writing the coding and serverless and so on. The supportability part of that, number 10, I know it's the last thing, but we need to understand exactly how we support it up front as well, because we're going to start piling all this stuff on. It's going to look great, it's going to sound great, but then once we actually get to production, I don't want it to be so complex or so development friendly that it's hard to support, if that makes sense.
So I think just make, whatever solution or approach we take, we need to be able to make sure that it's got supportability in mind.
True.
Yep.
Because we talk about there's solutions like Oracle has and others have, and it's great, but we seem to have the most problem when we have the support of that application. So Res and or A1 for that matter, when you develop it, great, you deploy it, fine, but the support of it, there's always that angst around how either the right resources, the right requirements, and so on, and that's again, I guess because I'm in this boat that whatever comes out of this, my team and I will be the recipient of that to support it in the field. I just want to be mindful of that. I love this high level, getting down into the weeds also of how we want to actually deploy this, but each faction needs to understand how do we support this once it gets out in the field, and that's all. I'll leave it there.
To be clear, the UCP though is this goes well beyond point of sale and what's out in the field. It's certainly the field is a huge part of this, but this is integration for anything, whether we're supporting it for off-prem, for analytics, for any sort of systems. So, I don't think it'll necessarily fall on your team. It'll instantly impact restaurant tech because they'll plug into the pegboard too, but the pegboard touches everybody. And you're right. Then that means everyone. If there's an issue, we're all screwed. So yeah, it has to be supportable. But I don't think it'll fall just on. It probably shouldn't fall to manage, but I don't think I think we're all we'll all hang together. I think in that regard.
No, I hear you. I appreciate that perspective, but yeah, I agree. It's all of us, but I just want to. The context of it is everything we're talking about is great, sexy, and it's going to work really good on paper. Work great in the lab, but again, supportability should be part of every aspect of this as we start knocking off these requirements as we move forward to building this. That's all.
Yeah, I agree.
I just want to add that, and this is just to borrow from the guiding principles of cloud architecture. If we design it properly, it should be self-healing, which plays into supportability.
What do you mean by that?
That means that if there is an issue, it would heal itself. If one of the servers is down, it will automatically spin out a new instance, depending on what the problem is. It's going to, load balancing, all the goodies.
Yeah. Auto scaling, I would say, is a form of self-healing.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to suggest something. You can tell me if this is relevant or not. What about, like now we have a dip, so we want to have one platform to support all the needs of the enterprise. We don't want to have multiple platforms, so whatever solution you look at needs to really address sort of the enterprise.
I still think keeping just at the high level supportability as a concept, whether that manifests itself with self-healing versus, the things that Marvin was expressing or the things that call us. I think as a guiding principle, keeping supportability in mind, broadly speaking, can encompass all of those things. Does that work for everyone? The other thing that I would say is obviously it needs to scale.
No, I agree.
What about?
I think we also
go ahead.
Excuse me. I was going to say when we talk about scale too, I think we have to also think in terms of scaling globally. Where even our cloud-based AWS stuff, I think we're focused primarily, North America, maybe even East Coast. But when we think in terms of if we're going to be a cloud or a serverless cloud-based capability, we still have to configure and think of this in terms of a global platform too.
Thank you, Charlie.
Oh, you're welcome, Harry.
No, Charlie, you beat me to it. I was going to mention that it has to be a platform that would support multinational and not necessarily domestic, but also international markets as well.
So then let's what about security then too, and some of the other things? It's when we start thinking about these things and put in these environments, how do we manage this from a security perspective, and have confidence that it is secure as well? Because there's some things that may not be PCI compliant. So we have to make sure that we are PCI compliant and secure. And I think that's something we have to factor in here somehow.
I think that's a great call out, Charlie. I mean, specifically, if we think about the needs are also around access and authentication for these APIs. I mean, do you want to deal with some type of token that you issue applications that try to consume some of your data? There's a process of and this could be the way you license and potentially monetize some of your APIs. You say, hey, you can apply for a token to utilize our guest API, and then that token's good for 30 days before you have to renew it or something like that. Yeah,
there has to be a whole, when it comes to access, and I don't know what the ITY word for this would be, but absolutely, it isn't just a bunch of of RESTful microservices, everything has to be secured, and you have to be granted appropriate tokens and keys to access these things. Essentially, we have to be, it has to be auditable in terms of all of
Definitely.
particularly when it comes to like PII and other sensitive information. So yeah, there's some dimensions to this around protecting the data, ensuring and the access to it, limiting access. If you're international too, it's like you may have to restrict what data can even go, or or where it can stay, logically, and then we of course have to have a whole dimension around it in terms of, and I think maybe this is the supportability or the monitorability in terms of just detecting attacks. But definitely has to have a whole component around policies for access and granting access to services, and definitely.
Yeah, Charlie, this is here. I just want to add that that's probably going to be part of the conversation we have with Laura next week. It's the meeting that we have. We need to kind of discuss that as well, just to have a broader understanding of what it takes and what we need to be prepared for.
So what about configurability of the actual data that's being exposed? I know a lot of these tools out there, I know, Charlie, you're familiar with Scava, but some of these tools have no-code solutions to adding data attributes or configuring data attributes or renaming data attributes or changing the type so that it's easier for you to manage or update them without having to write new code. Would you say that's something that you'd be expecting?
Yes, but we then still have to. But even if you had that, then it raises the flag as how do you govern it, right? So even if it's easier to do, it doesn't always necessarily mean it's the right thing to do, or people may end up,
right,
causing you get into a proliferation of garbage data and attributes as well. But absolutely, I think in order for us to be agile and for us to extend it and derive value, I think there has to be a configurability component to it, where you can add things like that without having to write code. Absolutely.
One thing I want to make sure, it's probably taken for granted, but logging needs to be a key part of all of this as well, especially for the accountability part.
Yeah.
So are you guys around logging expecting utilization of like a Splunk type tool, like a log aggregator visualization tool?
That would be very useful, yes.
What was that? I'm sorry.
We were saying, so when you think about logs, would you be expecting a solution like this to be utilizing like a log aggregation streaming visualization tool like Splunk?
I think at the very least, the ability to have a Splunk plug into it, whether or not, it has those tools native to it. I don't know that I have a really good, well-formed opinion one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's logging for debug and just performance and access and review, right? So you can always, if something does go wrong, you want to be able to log, but there's also audit as well. So maybe they do the same thing. But yeah, that's I think logging and a visualization tools for logging as well as for performance would be a very valuable component. I would love to see in this as well I mentioned before around application performance, but there has to be an APM, maybe it goes to supportability, either built in or built on top of, you can integrate or built. It can support some sort of APM across our entire stack then too. So not just the stuff that's on UCP, but you can measure, hey, we're having problems at a point of sale in this restaurant, and you can see performance all the way from the handheld device on the server tablet and what's happening there all the way up through to core systems that are connected through the commerce platform. That is, I think, would be essential for us.
So really, it sounds like that's kind of hitting on the visibility point there, and I think that's one of the important ones, Charlie. I know you mentioned monitoring earlier on.
there any element, like we have the source code ownership around POS, is there any element of that that would apply to these platforms we're looking at?
I guess the question would be, and I apologize if you guys already had mentioned it, is there a position you want to take on hosting? Is the expectation this absolutely needs to be hosted on your cloud and you're not going to consider a typical SaaS type deal where they're hosting on their cloud, like a multi-tenant versus single tenant?
I don't know that I have a, I think it would depend on the solution. I don't know that I would want to rule any particular approach out based on, being forced down a path one way or the other.
I think when I think about where Adrian wants to go with this, where we might want to go with this from a, sort of owning our own destiny. I kind of feel like, I'd like to at least, I think we want to own the cloud sort of infrastructure for it. That is to say, it should be, but it raises other questions. But if we have a SaaS model for it, I'm just a little wary. But I don't know what we'd be giving up from an architecturally and a capability perspective.
Yeah, I think, and that's really where I was going. I mean, my inclination is to say that it'd be ideal if, we were in control of our own domain, but does that mean that, I don't know that necessarily, if there was another solution that ticked all the boxes, if that meant, in my mind, would rule it out.
Right. And I guess the question would be if there is a SaaS solution out there for something like this, it raises the question for me, well, given the other dimensions that we've included here, why would they have to run in there? I think it would be interesting. I think if someone had built this, if there was a SaaS out there that does this, then they could conceivably, just deploy it anywhere, right? And that's one of the sort of the marvelous things about this. I'm just,
it could get wonky. Especially if you're looking at a framework that enables you to, build connections and hook multiple systems together, and then to the extent that some of that work is yours, and if it's something that's SaaS and hosted by somebody else, that could just get kind of weird.
Although what we don't know is there could always be a hybrid mode where a lot of this whatever they offer that is the core guts, could be in their environment, and but is extended into our own cloud where we submit or have our own code, but there's a lot of configuration that sort of joins the two. But where we need to extend, we become essentially our own providers into, like a SaaS, system, because anything like this would be you'd be able to plug into. So, where it could be that there's a SaaS thing out there that's the core, the heart that provides this manageable, supportable, configurable, scalable system, and that's auditable, but whatever, visible. And then what we're for our special sauce that is special to us, we just deploy in our own cloud environment and connect the two, so to speak. I don't. It's something that'd be more like an engine than and then we bring in whatever we'd be building out whatever we would need that's outside of the scope of that SaaS offering. But not knowing what those SaaS offerings out there, I mean, George, if there's something in mind that you're talking about, how might that work?
So, Charlie, we looked at about 3 or 4 so far, and I will say the ones we've looked at are all open to either SaaS or deploying in your cloud. So it seems like you could go either way, and they basically package up these services, and then actually you would work with them to implement them in your cloud, and they would help you get your unique applications plugged into them. For example, how do we get our menu management app plugged into it? How do we get a POS plugged into it? How do we get all these things plugged into it? So they would work with you on that type of implementation. So it doesn't seem like it's an unrealistic thing to say that we want it to be deployed in our AWS and we want it to be single tenancy. It seems like there's some options available if you want to take that stance.
Yeah, and I guess the value of going a SaaS model is if you don't have the AWS expertise, you need the 24-hour sort of ops support, and everything else that a SaaS provider brings. Then that's what you're getting isn't so much infrastructure as much as it is all of the supporting services around it. That's what it sounds like to me.
So some of them actually will offer managed services on top of your AWS as well. So I think there's some unique ways you can look at it. Yep,
I could totally see that too. Who are some of the vendors in this space? Can you just describe like some of the things that are out there? I mean, I feel like I'm trying to imagine something, I'm trying to imagine an elephant, but I've never seen one or had one described to me before. But I'm thinking of these dimensions, and it's sort of But what is there some examples at least that you can give us that are sort of high level?
We are actually right now going out and we're actually waiting on these guiding principles, and we're going to go out and grab a list of folks who we feel like meet those criteria. But off the top of my head, obviously, we've been looking at the Scava group because they have things that sort of align with this. There are things that a group like TIPCO does that could align with parts of this, but it's not really typically what TIPCO does. There's a new emerging company that's pretty interesting called Fraxis that's out of South Africa that are now having a U.S. presence that do a lot of no-code API solutions that are pretty interesting. But we're still early stage in trying to get this list together. So, after we get some of this input from you guys, we'll go out and aggregate a pretty expansive list.
Okay.
So can I rattle off some things just for everybody to shoot holes in, just some notes that I've taken so far? I'm kind of also hijacking some of what's on the screen right now. Configurable, audible, auditable, supportable, customizable/extensible, secure, scalable. I made a note for transport options, and that's really just multiple means of communication and the ability to support that. Routable and queuable.
Subscribable?
Thoughts on that? What's that?
Subscribable?
I like it. Anybody have any strong reactions for or against any of those that we hadn't talked about yet?
Queryable?
Queryable?
Yeah. That's not necessarily in the same vein as this, but it's interesting.
Any other ideas?
Oh, I got scalable.
Well, I would just say that add everything with the globally at the end.
Global.
Yep. All that you should be thinking about globally. Starting from the U.S., but we need to think about outside the U.S. different environment. When we do that.
Yeah, I think we actually have to think of our own selves as multi-market and potentially multi-tenant. So as we are, conceivably, while we may have some areas where there will be data flowing between, perhaps like IHOP and Applebee's, and brand N, but there may be some walled gardens too, where this stuff can't ever get into that area, and certainly whether that's done at a market level or a brand level or combinations thereof.
So what about dealing with accessibility for the data? And I mean, especially if you're talking international, and all across domestic, you deal with latency issues if they're hosted in only one availability zone potentially, especially if you're trying to get requests back in real time. Right. Is there some expectation around having, multiple availability zones with this? So they say they have a AWS data center on Northern Virginia, another one in Oregon, and maybe another one in Europe, so that you can have your international supported without latency issues.
I mean, that goes without saying.
Yep. From an ideal standpoint, yes.
Now that will bring up questions too, because there may be some things where you have redundancy across the whole area. So it's see the same, but then in some cases we may have to just limit data too. That is, if you have stuff coming out of Europe, some PII, that you have to be able to leave an area, right? So that we have to be able to support, it has to be, it can be compliant with various privacy and other security sort of requirements. And
yeah, certain area, certain region, you may require local redundancy, but others that are more linear, you may be able to fail over to the next country or next region that's nearby. But there's a thought about that.
Chris, I mean, if we wanted to, and I don't know maybe this goes to supportability or extensibility, but it's, if we wanted to build things like in a dev environment or spin up something, when you're cloud native like this, you can create sort of just real sort of micro verses of the same thing, just run it in your own little pool. I mean, how do we set something up in a way or define it so that you can literally have the whole environment running, but in a sort of dev space or sandbox, for somebody, I think you understand what I'm struggling with right now. But.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to use AWS as the context here, ideally it would be separate accounts for separate environments. Or, I mean, if we get into some depth, it may be just separate VPCs for separate environments.
Mm-hmm. It could be different availability zones.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking of too is, though, as a developer, if you had to build something, rather than just building, saying I'm building this one piece, but I need, you want to test everything end to end, rather than having to say that you're plugging, basically that you could replicate the entire Dyn environment just with a hit of a button and be working in your own little space and not really touch anything else, but it can source data, pull stuff in for development work, and you can essentially have what looks like, virtually, maybe on a very micro scale, but the whole environment where you could have, theoretically have, simulated POS clients attached to it, web orders coming through, and you can build services or capable things to plug into it without having to plug into a quote unquote dev environment, right? There isn't like a global dev. Everybody has a dev, or everyone can sort of spin these things up. Because once you get cloud native, you don't, and maybe that's just fundamentally there, you don't have the whole paradigm of having dev staging production that's shared by everybody sort of evaporates.
So are you thinking sort of like a blue-green deployment model, whether you have like effectively two almost live?
No, I was really thinking more like if I'm a developer, like if I wanted Chris to build something, literally he could go in, we could spin him up with an account, and he would have something that looked like every service and capability all in a little space that he can work with. And if he's running shit that hits everything and floods something, it's not going to bother anybody else. It is just its own little microcosm, its own sandbox of the entire environment, as opposed to saying, all right, I have a sandbox for this service, but if I want to run it, I got to then punch it out to some dev environment. It's like a modular sort of approach to or conception of, it's like a universe in the bottle, as opposed to I have to plug into the dev environment. I want a dev environment. Boom, here's a button. I've got an instance of everything I need. It's just scaled down for my purposes to run development on, and it doesn't have to be globally scalable as much as it is just all of the services and features are all right here, and I can traverse them, and then when I'm ready, I can package this up and pull out maybe just the pieces I've changed and throw it into another environment.
Charlie, I believe everything that you just mentioned is natively supported in AWS.
Exactly. Because that's not the way we work right now, right? We have to create all these dev boxes and instances because we have a bunch. We don't have any cloud. We have a lot that's not cloud native, or cloud based, and so or serverless. But yeah, I think maybe it's part of just the serverless environment too.
Yep.
Maybe that's
well, I mean, yes. I mean, what you're describing, I think it can be accomplished with Docker containers.
That's it. That's the word I was looking for. Docker containers.
Yes, and then through then independent AWS accounts combined with these Docker containers.
So that's a specific way of achieving something. What's the ility that this is? Is it
containerization?
Yeah, containerization.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a containability. I don't know if that's and if maybe that is just a nuance to being cloud native. I don't know, or serverless, but I think that's an important component because we want to be able to make it easy for anybody who's doing development for us to, for us to create some containers that they can essentially do all the work in that they need to do, and it's easy for us to spin people up and get them working.
It would help greatly, especially when in the innovation space.
In the innovation space, but also when you deal with things like, just to ensure you have consistent data for, for developing features, like the problem we have with our sandbox environment, where you've got crummy old data, and you have to say, well, you got to struggle to say, well, what's the test lab that we're sending orders to? All this stuff right now becomes, completely irrelevant. You've got everything you need in your environment, and it doesn't impact what a developer next to you is working on.
Yep, that would be ideal.
Hey guys, I don't want to be Debbie Downer here, but the only thing I think is missing on this as well, and again, it's kind of rudimental, is affordability. So again, lots of good ideas, but back to supportability, I think affordability is key. I deal with that on a regular basis now, just with new technology, trying to get it into to the stores as far as getting the principals and the franchisees to agree to this is the right cost model that will afford a good ROI. So just, I would like to add that to the list if possible.
It's on the list. Any other ideas? Do you have any other ideas? So, how would you like to proceed here? You want me to just pull this together and send out the list, and maybe we can think about it, take a look at it, and provide some feedback to each other?
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate the time. I think it's a good conversation. Anybody want to offer any comments before we turn off?
No, I'll just.
I was just going to throw out, if anybody has an aha moment after this, don't hesitate to send it along.
Yeah, I think it was a good dialogue. I think it's starting to shape, and we'll figure out how it gets structured and what it is. So this was actually turned out really good. So I appreciate everybody taking the time today.
It was fun.
All right.
Yeah, this was good.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Sharon,
thanks for setting this up. This was a great talk. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.